Hello, everyone, and welcome to the India Deep Tech podcast series hosted by TDK Ventures. I'm your host, Siddharth Mehta, Investment Director at TDK Ventures. The topic of today's podcast is based on the venture capital and investment trends in the Indian startup deep tech ecosystem. For this, I have my guest today, Vishesh Rajaram, who is a managing partner at Speciale Invest. Welcome, Vishesh, to the show.
Thanks, Ed. Pleasure to be here and excited for what's ahead for the next 40 minutes to an hour. Thank you.
Great, so much. So, Vishesh, I'll kind of start off with a very basic question: the definition of deep tech. I hear every investor has its own version of deep tech. So, in your world and in Special's world, what is the definition of deep tech, and how would you classify a deep tech startup?
Yeah, I think for us, deep tech is, of course, a more recent coined word. It's often abused as well. I think our limited view is we want to help founders build hard to build technologies of the future. And I think the connotation for deep tech is that it possibly has multiple streams of science or multiple streams of technology coming in, be it AI, and, be it vision or be it material sciences and a new form of manufacturing. So you're expecting multiple streams of science to come together to create a deep technology mode, which otherwise hasn't happened or whose timing hasn't come before. So that's how we sort of look at disruptive or deep tech within the organization.
Very interesting. And would you kind of classify a difference between an engineering problem to be solved versus a lab problem that to be solved, or both of them are kind of equally deep tech for you?
So I think the way we look at that is whether the problem has a exponential impact or a linear impact. So we start from what does tech really mean? What does it lead? Is this a 20-30% efficiency improvisation on a problem statement? Or is it changing the landscape of the problem statement by a few 100%, right? And if it's the latter, then of course we're more excited because then we think that this is a tech or a problem that's having exponential impact to an existing market or a large upcoming market. Within that, we know that given specific to our organization, that we're a seed fund, so we're unfaziled with the lab scale of operations. We understand that there is a need for deeper evolution to move from lab, to scale or to, factory, and there could be challenges there. But that's essentially the risk we're learning to underwrite and take. So to us, it's more important what that means and what impact it creates from a technology or a market landscape. And we're very comfortable getting in at lab level, knowing that we're underwriting the scale-up risk.
Very interesting. And I'll kind of maybe double click on this one later in the podcast, but just getting on the next topic of discussion. I know a lot of Indian universities, be it like IT Madras or IICs, are playing a very, very important role in catalyzing this whole deep tech startup ecosystem in the country. What is your view on how these universities are kind of impacting the deep tech startups evolution? And even there's one more trend I see, a lot of founders of deep tech companies are churning out next startups, be it like take an example of maybe a founding team of Ather starting another deep tech company. So there are these two big trends of universities as well as successful founders and co-founding team of the deep tech startups launching their own versions of deep tech startups. How do you think both of them playing out?
I think they're both excellent observations. We'll have to step back a little bit, right? If you look at where true venture started in North America, a lot of it started around the MIT labs and Stanford labs, right? And I think India's had its own journey and evolution. If you roll back and look at some of these technology institutions like IIT Bombay, Delhi, IIT Madras, IIT Roorkee, IIC Bangalore, they have in the last 2 decades transitioned from pure academic research to working with corporate on technology, IP sharing, and IP transition, and a lot of those problems. So I think there have at least been a few decades and a few hundred academicians who crossed or transitioned from research to solutions and products. What we hadn't seen enough was them also transitioning to building organizations and running companies. But it has clearly happened in other geographies, in other technologies, in other parts of the world. And I think it was only a matter of time and evolution for us to start seeing this in India. And to me, the last 3-4 years of operating the deep tech practice at Speciale, we've really seen that play out. Dr. Satya Chakravarti, who was a professor and head of Department of Aerospace Engineering in IIT Madras, is now the founder, CEO, CTO at Train Company, and he's running the company full time. He's not an active professor anymore. There, we have a similar situation with a company called InSpace or IIT Bombay. So we think it's an evolution which is gradual and natural. Of course, this has started 2 decades ago in this country. It may have started 5 decades ago in some other country, but the patterns are comparable between all of these geographies, and it's only obvious you're going to see more of it happen at one level. At another level, it's a very positive development that one, you've got founders coming back to do new companies, and you've got young engineers who are first engineers of companies that have seen a life cycle of building into an institution come to start. And that too you have seen before, right? We famously read about the PayPal mafia, or more recently even the Flipkart sort of mafia. We've seen people who've been in these large companies that have seen scale up, possibly also seen some wealth creation that gives them the risk appetite to come and build something ground up again. I think it's a positive trend. We're increasingly seeing this at our organization. We most recently invested in a company called Eternal Energy, and both the founders were ex-Aether Log9 people, and they built battery plants there. So we're seeing what you're saying.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just double click on this one, especially on the university side. You did mention there are professors who are kind of now starting their own companies. There's a pivot which is happening, where people and professors are not just kind of maybe doing research, but they're also thinking about products and companies. How do you see a fit in this segment? I mean, do you see a good fit where an academician, a professor, is he kind of very well equipped to run a company as a CEO? Or he can be a good technology person, but can he be a leader of his company? How do you see that kind of a gap being filled?
I think the most intuitive bias most of us have is that they are more likely to be good CTOs and may or may not on the CEO. But my experience says otherwise. I think they stand as good a chance of being CEO or organization builders as anybody else. I think we all come with a bias that they're more technological / academic in approach, but that's not necessarily the case. I think they've, in their own journeys, have a lot of people interaction, organization building in their own lives. And I think you're seeing that. And I can take Satya's case in point. He, of course, is also the center coordinator for NCCRD, which is a large center for combustion research, which has also given the journey of building an organization around that, raising some form of grants, fairly large amounts of grants to set it up. I think in some way, shape, or form, they've crossed similar paths. May not be exactly the same as raising venture capital and building a company, but building things. I think there's some of them have seen, and I think they're more natural to adapt to being founders.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of them learn and get inspired by the other. Right? I think IIT Bombay had this EV, I think, motor company that came out and did very well about 8-9 years ago, and that inspired a number of professors to actually think about going beyond academia to work on projects and to potentially even do startups. So some of this is just evolution of the ecosystem, and it'll happen.
Right. And maybe from a VC investor's perspective, would you kind of do some extra diligence on a company which is maybe run by a professor versus maybe being run by a full-time?
I think in deep science and tech, we spend a good 30-40 hours just talking to founder, their background, their people. You have to be extra tenacious. As it is, entrepreneurship is very hard. Deep tech also carries the baggage of long gestation period, not easy to raise capital, not brush. Hence, you just need to be extra tenacious to live long enough to play it. So I think that often you sort of test it through. I wouldn't necessarily say there is an extra diligence needed for an academician vis-a-vis non-academician, but there's a lot of diligence needed to make sure that they're tenacious enough and patient enough and ambitious enough to live through that journey.
It's quite interesting, and maybe I would love to know more about this diligence thing. How you're kind of doing this at Speciale, given it's still early stage for you, and deep tech in early stage itself is such a difficult problem to kind of solve. So, what are your diligence ways of analyzing companies which are still deep tech, still early stage? It kind of brings more uncertainty on the table. So, how would you do a diligence on an early stage deep tech company?
So, I think I mean, there are many ways to do this. I think the four broad frameworks we keep is one is to try and understand who the founders are. What do they know about the domain or the product or the opportunity that they're building something that is different and hard for most others to build, which is sort of the foundational element for us, right? What do you know that most people don't know or don't agree with you that allow you to go build something that others won't do or can't do or don't know how to do, right? That's sort of the pivotal piece to it. The second piece is why hasn't this been done before? Why is the market timing any better now than ever before? I think the good way to get around this is to actually look at other parts of the world, and I think this is where a lot of our networks, in let's say Israel or Singapore, come in handy, where we're able to call in academia or able to call in corporate to figure out what innovation is going on in that part of the world and why things haven't worked or have worked, and why is the timing now. We also talk to enough IP attorneys, not so much about whether we have an IP here and whether we can file it, but more to make sure that there is white space around the innovation that is being built. A lot of the times, IP itself is a strategy. People may not want to file IP; they may just want to keep it a trade secret. But you want to make sure that you're not trampling over other people, and you have enough white space to operate where you are.
Yeah.
I think these sort of three become quite centric to what you're doing. And going back to the earlier comment, we spoke about exponential vis-a-vis incremental. We'd like to see some of that translate to in potentially large gross margins as and when you get revenues. I think we very well understand that you're unlikely to get to revenues over the next 2 years. But as and when you do, you're not necessarily doing this for 10, 15%, but you're doing this for 50, 70%. So it makes this whole fight worthwhile.
Yeah, very interesting. So it's kind of focus on the persistence of the team and the insights what they have within the organization about the IPs or the tech secrets what they're building.
I think it largely converges around what is the founder moat that leads to a founder market fit, and how does that translate to an IP or a business moat over time.
Yeah.
I think that's very centric to our investment philosophy.
Yeah, so that's kind of a very golden nugget for any startup or deep tech founder listening to this podcast, on what exactly you should be doing for attracting deep tech VCs like yourself. Interesting. So, I mean, if you look at Vishesh, if you look historically, the Indian VC ecosystem was super indexed on maybe investing in fintech or e-commerce or payment lending kind of a system, right? And slowly there's a pivot which is happening where people and VCs are kind of investing in climate tech or deep tech or maybe deep science innovations, right? So, I mean, what is that thing which has changed, which has made a lot of financial VCs now think about a deep science or a deep tech investments in their portfolio?
I think fundamentally speaking, capital attracts itself towards large opportunities first. I think consumer and fintech are all very large markets as far as India demographics are concerned. It gives you avenue to deploy large amounts of capital to potentially create large outcomes, right? And hence, you've seen some of that play itself out. And I think some of that is also ground up linked to the markets evolving and timing itself right. The internet penetration, the mobile phone penetration, all of these very fundamental trends that happened 15 years ago have sort of fueled the growth of these markets. So it then becomes very obvious that these are very large markets. Now, it's very less obvious when it comes to deep tech, right? We invested in space in the year 2018. Arthur Little sent a report 2 weeks ago saying that the market for Indian space is 100 billion. 4 years ago, nobody had that size. It was about 8 billion for 2 years forward. So I think it's the uncertainty of the more obvious trends that makes it harder to figure out deep tech. And hence, I think people have possibly done the more obvious ones early on, number one. But my view to this is, everything has cycles. Going back 15 years, you've seen e-commerce really take off 2008 onwards, went on till 12 years thereafter. SaaS sort of had, while the Freshworks and the likes of them got started in 2011, it was really 2013, 14 that folks started to sit up and realize that they could build products out of India. And that has had a 10-year run till now where people are building SaaS. Deep science and tech, of course, I think started its time somewhere in 2017, 2018. And my optimistic Kool-Aid view is that the next 10 years is all about building deep tech out of India for the world.
Yeah.
What makes deep tech hard is it's less obvious. It all operates in its silo. Like the market for quantum is very different from the market for space, is very different from the market of green hydrogen. You can't broad brush them with saying the country is growing, so this will grow. No. These are very likely to grow faster than some of the other sectors. So you've got to pick the right silo or the right vertical to operate. That's the first part. The second part is there's very little replicability of a playbook between an EV company and a battery company and a robotics company and a quantum security company. They're all very different. So if someone's looking at saying, I want to get a deep tech playbook, it's very likely you're just going to have two different pages that have a huge standard deviation over the other.
Yeah.
And hence, it's not necessarily built for scale. I don't think we're at a stage today to deploy $2-3 billion in tech in 2023, 24. Can we 5 years from now do it? Absolutely, yes. In order to do that, should we be doing a host of activities between now and the next 2 years? Absolutely, yes. Is that what Speciale wants to do? Yes.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I mean, do you also see a trend, where you've actually said that there was an option to allocate more capital, on fintech and on e-commerce or consumer internet businesses? That's why a lot of capital kind of went in that space. Deep tech maybe doesn't have the potential as of now, but it is also offering a lot of VC funds a hedging strategy, right? Because, fintech, e-commerce has cycles coming up and down, but maybe deep tech is kind of a good hedging strategy for a lot of these investors. So just maybe I want to pick your thought on how do you see a strength of the Indian deep tech ecosystem? Where do you think a Indian deep tech play could be very suitable for the whole globe? And I'm sure like there are not all the areas. There's some specific areas. It can be maybe a more of an digitalization, AI, ML focused deep tech play. It could be space tech where India has a good advantage on. So what are those key areas where you think India has a good advantage on the deep tech compared to the globe?
I'll answer this in two parts. One is I'm a big believer of half glass full, right? I'm very happy with half glass full. So if someone comes and asks me if the deep tech ecosystem in India perfect, short answer is no, but I'm satisfied, right? The deep tech market and ecosystem is growing, and many parts of it is going to be constant work in progress. And there's no reason to complain about it. I think we should be very happy about it. First. Second part to your question on, hey, what are some of the sub layers that India has a natural competency advantage? I think there are a few verticals. If you sort of roll back 20 years and look at the liberalization era, I think India has great expertise in petrochemicals, hydrocarbons, chemistry, pharmaceuticals, biotechnology. The next wave for all of this would be green chemistry, clean tech, battery materials, material science innovation, synthetic biology. I think there's a natural unexplored advantage we have there. You've got a lot of very capable people who work in large corporate and in academia doing these innovations. You've got some very strong departments within the government that are very strong in science, right? Be it the biotechnology department, be it the Department of Space, ISRO. They're one of the most reputed space agencies in the world. And now they've opened up private space. They've not only opened up private space, the department's working very closely with young fledgling startups to support them with testing facilities, with talent, with advice, with counsel, and guardrails. So some of these where you've got guardrails available either in the form of policy intervention or form of talent or in the form of precedence of some success in the previous generation are all low-hanging fruits for the deep tech market to evolve. And some of that you're seeing, right? We have historically been very strong in manufacturing. A lot of our OEM companies have exported their vehicles to other parts of the world. So we have good competency, capability, and infrastructure to do EV in India. Ether, ultraviolet are all classic examples of that story. Agnicool is a classic example of the ISRO guardrail story, right? ISRO has given you the frameworks, the rails, the policy supporting you to play with. Nutriphase, which is a green hydrogen production enabler company, is again a significant beneficiary of the green hydrogen policy that's come out, which is giving a strong push to refineries and other energy companies to move towards using green hydrogen. So I think a policy in combination with precedence of talent or capability or infrastructure is the more obvious sectors that will flourish sooner than later.
That is very interesting. I mean, you did brought about the policy thing, and I know the Indian government just maybe a few days back launched the India Deep Tech Startup Policy as well.
Yeah, literally like 24 hours ago or something, or 48 hours ago. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, if you got a chance to kind of review, or I mean, do you see any kind of good support, on the macro side, on the policies from the government?
So I think I'm a trained optimist. Sid. If you go back and Google the word deep tech in the Indian government 10 years ago, I don't know if you'll find a lot of it. So I haven't done it myself. So the very fact that they have the word deep tech and they have a policy for it just shows the amount of trust the country has now towards potentially putting itself in the map for being a great global partner for technology. To me, that's the big takeaway, right? And like I said, it's always going to be half glass full. You can always come up with saying, hey, these two clauses in this policy is very hard. Maybe it is. It's a large country. Nothing's easy, right? But the fact that there is a policy and the fact that there's a think tank, thinking about making it more encouraging, if not easier, to go out there to do deep tech itself is a welcome break.
Absolutely. I think the fact that there is a focus on deep tech.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And they're thinking about different things. I think I read in the Economic Times that they're trying to set up a fund to support deep tech VCs. Of course, I'm very excited and enamored by reading that. But those are all very positive things, right? In the direction of trying to make sure that there is more capital being allocated to build resilience, competency, and differentiation for this country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on this one, I know a lot of global funds, who are always kind of keen to explore the Indian VC ecosystem, but there's this level of, I would say, lack of awareness of what's happening in India. So what would your kind of message to these global funds, especially on the deep tech investing? Where do you position India? What are the strengths you would convey? Yeah, where are the opportunities kind of lying in the whole deep tech startup ecosystem?
I think India has always leapfrogged, be it the PC adoption, be it the mobile adoption, be it the internet penetration. I'm saying the scale will be the same, but I'm saying that we will definitely surprise the global audience by doing things that people think we can't do. Right? So I will not be surprised if international organizations think that they may be low on their radar at this point of time for deep science and tech innovation. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what they think. I think the way to get around this is, I think, like I was in Gujarat on Saturday for the Semicon India policy. You had a lot of international participation. Of course, a lot of it was harbored and anchored around the Prime Minister being there and them sort of inaugurating the policy and a large amounts of investment coming into the country. That's one avenue where the policy opens up to say that, hey, we're serious about what we're doing. We're confident that this country is innovating at the right pace, at the right time, for the right reasons. I think the second sometimes is also you have to see it to believe it, right? You will see a couple of SpaceX-like companies come out of there. You'll have to see a couple of, Tesla-like equivalents on the two-wheeler space to come out here and flourish. And I think then people will stand up and notice, saying that, okay, they are seriously building technology in organizations. I think geopolitics will also play to our benefit. We are clearly today a trusted partner in consideration for sensitive technology or deep technology. And I think that this is our time to play.
Yeah, I think very true, especially on the geopolitics side, given all the focus on India, I think it's a good bullish space to be in now. Great. So switching gears a bit, Vishesh, and I know that we spoke a lot about the enablers and some of the strengths of the India's deep tech ecosystem. I know like this is still an area which is upcoming. There are challenges, there are roadblocks in the whole ecosystem. So what would be your kind of pick on, some of the challenges for the deep tech ecosystem in India? What are some of the areas where founders or investors should be really thinking about before they take any bets in that space?
So I would go back to the fact that there is a playbook. Right? Each one has to create their own playbook. I think the entrepreneurs have to think about risk ground up on what they're building. What are the different phases of risk at different levels? How does capital and execution enable them to address, diversify, or kill risk at every stage? And how does that allow them to access more capital? Raising capital has not been straightforward, will not be straightforward, simply because there's too much nuance for every sector. What this means is just more responsibility on the founders to figure that part out and set the right expectations with the investors and the ecosystem partners. I think investors will also have to view deep tech with a different lens. I don't think it's highly replicatable across sectors. There will not be one playbook that fits all. You'll have to evolve and play it. You'll have to figure out different approaches for different companies. Different sectors will have different capital efficiencies and outcomes. So it needs a little more nuanced approach. I wouldn't say it needs a long term. I mean, everything needs a long term approach. It needs a nuanced approach.
Yeah. I mean, how do you see even the LPs of the fund, right? I mean, because it's a long-term play, right? You can't have a scalable company in maybe 3-4 years, just like LPs are used to seeing a SaaS company doing evolution. So how is that LP expectation playing this whole mindset on the VC funds?
I think I can speak for ourselves. We've got long-term patient investors who understand the nature of investments we do, the sector strategy we have. We're not 15-year funds. We're still 8 to 10-year funds, right? Unlike some of the US deep tech funds. So I think we carry that responsibility as much as our entrepreneurs to manage our expectations with our investors. But I think the trick is in being able to simplify the risk you're taking, break them down into phases, and try and see if you're making progress on. I mean, if I were to look at Agnikul and say the biggest risk I'm taking is monetization, till I have revenues, I've not solved that risk. I'm partly right and I'm partly wrong. I'm partly wrong to the extent that there are 5 or 7 other phases of technology and market adoption risk that I would have had to see flag off, get it checked off. And those are the points of validation that we're heading in the right direction. And I think then it becomes important for you to translate that as a GP back to your LPs. So this is the nature of risk your portfolio carries at different levels and different stages and how you're progressing across each.
Got it. I know that's kind of a very interesting message, for a lot of the funds who are more used to software or e-commerce investing. This is a slightly different expectations what they have to set with the LPs. Maybe on this one as well, Vishesh, how do you really see the universities or maybe a kind of a good access to research centers or laboratories or equipments? Is that kind of hampering some of the cutting edge research what Indian startups want to do compared to the global ones?
So I wouldn't compare anything to global scale because I think it's all in the silo, right? We've started, let's say 3 decades ago, somebody else has started 6 decades ago. So it's unfair to sort of compare myself in an unequal race. If I were to look at myself in the absolute and say, do our universities have the right kind of infrastructure? I would say a thumping yes. I mean, I would definitely go back and look at our EV battery company or the sort of lab that they were benefiting off at IIT Bombay, or Agnikul, sort of the test facility that they had at NCCRD and IIT Madras. These are all of great value. Or the GAN semiconductor plant that's coming up at IISc Bengaluru. Yeah, I mean, if you compare them, MIT and Stanford, I don't know. I don't even have an answer because I haven't seen enough in Stanford or MIT. But my guess is on an absolute basis, there's a lot that's going on in this part of the world. And I have no reason to complain.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a good, I would say, investment which is coming from government on these universities to promote deep tech ecosystem in India. So there's absolutely positive tailwinds, and the macro policy is favorable towards the deep tech system. So that's interesting. And maybe if I ask you, I mean, which are some of the, or maybe which are the top 3 deep tech trends which you are kind of most bullish about coming from India, where you really see that, hey, there is a positive strength of the Indian ecosystem capturing those top 3 deep tech trends? What those 3 would be?
I think the material science industry, synthetic biology industry, of course, the manufacturing industry. These are 3 big players that I think we're looking at. Material science, because I think geopolitics will restrict how goods and materials and rare earth elements move from different parts of the world. And if you're using science-led innovation to sort of make products that don't need complex materials, expensive materials that are no longer available, then you're solving a big pain point. So that's one theme that we're quite excited about. Synthetic biology theme very much similar to that, looking at alternate ways or more efficient ways, or more sustainable ways that are also commercially meaningful to make products in industry, food, biopharma. I agree that could again be having exponential impact to that market is another area of interest. I think broad brush manufacturing, EV, battery, a lot of that built for India, built for the world also makes a lot of sense.
No, that's very interesting. I mean, I know like you did kind of specifically focused on the space tech in these top 3. Do you kind of classify maybe space tech and what some material science innovation as well, because they're kind of innovating something on
Well, I'm trying to look at 3 years forward. I think space is happening as we speak. So I think the top 3 was more forward-looking and not the ones that are already happening, right? Space, robotics, quantum, semiconductor, they're all already playing out. You've got policies set up for them. and you've
Right.
got startups and funding already playing out to that. So I've sort of kept those four out of the three, and the three are sort of more forward-looking, gazing at the crystal ball view.
Interesting. So I think I would say a lot of investors have this inhibition about that, hey, can Indian startups scale from India to the globe, right? And we do have some examples where the Indian startups have scaled from India to the globe, but we haven't really seen such cases, especially in the deep tech sector, which is still nascent, I understand. But do you really see that happening? And what are some of the, I would say, positive touch points or things which you really feel can make them happen from India to the whole globe?
I don't think there are macro actions that will lead to it. I think these will have to be in the micro, the opportunities and nature of the founders. So if you look at Grey Orange, I think they sort of transitioned very well to sort of being a global robotics system integrator, warehousing support company, not just one out of India. Pixel's doing a reasonable job in sort of being in India, US, Earth observation company. I think there's Carbon Clean, which is another company that is working on decarbonization, which sort of also became an India, Europe cross-border company. So a lot of this is a question of timing, the market, and where the need is. Like today, if I were to do battery recycling, it's very likely that a company like Metastable Materials can sort of move India, Europe, because the rate of adoption for that fee may just be that much more. And often you as a founder are navigating your way to find two markets that are going to adopt you faster than the others. So there could be markets where the European markets or the American markets may simply adopt much faster because the need is more painful, in which case you sort of more easily become a global company.
Yeah.
I mean, if the market doesn't need you there, and it's very hard for you to sort of go be a global company beyond for vanity reasons.
Understand. And do you think the fabric of the Indian startups, I mean, is it like meant in terms of scaling up globally? You have kind of seen that DNA in the team, in the founders, where they kind of start thinking about a global business, versus just building a company for India. Is that a trend you are seeing more and more in the early stage companies?
Yeah, I think often if the problems are solvable beyond India, you also realize very quickly that sometimes you're also able to earn a lot more on those outside India because the paying propensity for the tech is a lot more in other parts. So you tend to think global from ground up. I don't think founders transition from being Indian to global. I think today founders start their journey saying, I'm building from India for the world.
Very interesting. Yeah, and I think this is one of the change which we are seeing in the entrepreneurship ecosystem of India, where it's not just meant for India, but hey, can we make solutions from India to the globe? And that's a very positive change. Very good. Just maybe touching upon one important topic, and I know this is very important maybe for a lot of deep tech founders. What would be your advice? If I want to pick up maybe top three things which you want to give as a golden nugget to the deep tech entrepreneurs on what they should be focusing on while building a deep tech venture?
I think you need to be patient and tenacious at first because you're starting on a very hard journey. Entrepreneurship in general is hard. It's just harder when you're doing deep tech because the world understands it less, right? Which means you have to take a lot more effort in making sure the world understands what you're doing, why you're doing. I think you need to be an evangelist. You need to wear the hat of an evangelist to your customers, to your organization, to your investors, and try and oversimplify what you're trying to solve for. Number one. Number two, you have to start thinking about your business in the form of risks. Because the whole world is already thinking that, oh, you're high risk, you're long gestation, you're capital intensive, or any other jargon that can be thrown at you. So you then want to start giving them a different set of jargons, which is you want to think about your business as different forms of risk. Technology risk, scale-up risk, market adoption risk, customer risk, GTM risk. And then you start putting that on a timeline and start also putting the capital you need along the timeline chart to then simplify the different phases of this organization evolution and the capital it needs. Not everything will be easy. There may be companies that you need 10 million to start. There may be companies you can do with $500,000 to start as well. So I think you have to first understand the DNA of the industry you operate and what you need. And then you have to evaluate whether there's a fit between you and the current financial industry you're surviving in to see if there's matching of expectations. I think that's an important piece to sort of register in mind that I need to think of me and my company and what this would mean to somebody else. As again saying, I just want to raise capital, right? That's just a very nuanced way to look at it.
So I think that's interesting, right? I think you did mention about how do you simplify the problem statement and what they're building, because one thing is that there are not many investors in the ecosystem who would understand and appreciate a deep tech problem, right? Maybe some investors don't appreciate the market size of those deep tech problems. Some don't appreciate the solution what the founders are building. So how would you kind of maybe advise the founders from India? Because I know there's a extensive global pool of deep tech capital which is also available. Is there a suggestion or advice from your side where the Indian entrepreneurs can tap into that global deep tech investment pool?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think we hosted the Hello Tomorrow folks in Bangalore a few months ago, and they seem like having a Southeast Asia practice and a Europe practice where they work closely with deep tech founders coming together to help them sort of think through and get a forum for them to present themselves. Entrepreneur First again, which is Southeast Asia, India, Europe, like also has a flavor to that. I think the Hacks guys, the IndieBio guys in North America, in Hong Kong, do a fair bit of that. It'll be nice to see some homegrown ones also coming out. It's a matter of time. I think there are some platforms and avenues for folks to go out there and stand up and get more visibility for sure.
Very interesting. And one more question in similar lines. I mean, I know there's tremendous interest on India now from global VCs, and these are a lot of deep tech VCs, or these are corporate strategic CVCs who are kind of keen on India now. What would be your kind of advice or suggestions to them, when they're thinking about launching their India offices or thinking about India as a good innovation ecosystem? Where would you think, or where would you advise them to kind of tap into? What are the ways they can explore the market, and some suggestions to them?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is for them to unlearn what they already know about India, because the assumptions of India is now very different than it was 20 years ago, right? That's one. And I think, this applies to anybody entering a new geography or not, is to make sure you have guardrails around you. You work with local investors or local institutions or local accelerators who have some view of the lay of the land. Not that, India is an unknown, that's not understandable. It's very much a known market. It's very much understandable. But I think working through local partners and local ecosystem is a nice way to sort of acclimatize yourself if you're coming in from outside. And wearing my sales hat out there, we're quite open to work with a lot of the international CVCs to try and get to help them see India better.
Yeah, I know, and I think a lot of these CVCs also kind of struggle for India, right, internally. So just kind of getting aware of the India opportunity and how this can really help them in-house in their own company would be very, very interesting. Right. No, this has been a very fascinating conversation, Vishesh. So thank you so much for joining us today in this podcast, and I really appreciate your time for this discussion.
Very exciting. Thank you for having me. As always, it was good chatting up with you.
Great, thanks.